All right, so let's go back to this exercise I want to do, and I want to build on the story we talked about on Monday, but try to explain why it's disappearing. And I'm going to lament why it's disappearing, because I don't think it should be disappearing, and try to sort of help you discern, which one of these alarming stories, how much do you worry about Trump's alarming rhetoric versus his alarming deeds? So look, if you listen to Monday's episode, I spent a good chunk of time slowing things down, walking through a story that I think is easy to miss in this current information ecosystem. I knew that this didn't have easy visuals to show, bells and whistles, but what I really believe is that this is the worst corruption scandal we've ever had involving an American president. It's bigger than Teapot Dome and bigger than Watergate. And I know because we're so numb to Trump's transactionalism, we just don't see it, right? But that's why I wanted to walk through the details very deliberately, because it's incredibly important. And it was of course, I'm referring to the Wall Street Journal story, the report about how sovereign wealth fund of UAE investments into a crypto company that really wasn't going anywhere for Trump, that suddenly became relevant. It led to a change in the United States of America's policy on AI and chips, and of course led to a pardon of a very controversial figure in the crypto world, and all of it happening while Trump was receiving hundreds of millions of dollars in cash, Trump and his family. Now, the story didn't have dramatic visuals, and it wasn't easy to villainize somebody in a moment. It was it's a story that requires some patience. In some ways, as I said, right, you need either the whiteboard on A Beautiful Mind or Claire Danes in Homeland to sort of see how everything is connected. And I really believe that it was the most important story of the weekend, and really something that should be seen, that every congressional reporter should be asking every member of Congress about it, right? That type of story to sort of get Congress off its ass and start worrying about whether presidents are following the Constitution. But then the rest of Monday happened, right? You had the Dan Bongino podcast that the president did, where he mused about federalizing elections, which of course, that quick comment coupled with the video footage of the bizarre Tulsi Gabbard-led FBI raid of Fulton County in Atlanta with the 2020 ballots, and boom, right? You instantly had a bit viral of a feeding frenzy on a specific story. By Tuesday morning, you wake up and it's the Kennedy Center. He's just canceled it, shutting it down for 2 years. Again, a shiny metal object story became the lead of the day. And oh, by the way, the government was shut down, so we had to reopen that. And all of it shoving what is perhaps the biggest scandal in American history further and further and further down the information ecosystem ladder. And of course, the sudden burst of rhetorical crazy from Trump involving the midterms led to a whole bunch of questions that I regularly get from both listeners, viewers, and friends and family, starting to panic. Is he gonna cancel the midterms? And it always leads to this question: how anxious should we all be right now? And and I get it, right? Are things collapsing? Is this different? Is Trump actually serious this time? What guardrails are left that could stop him on this? So here's what I want to do. I don't want to hype your anxiety, and I don't want to dismiss it either. What I want to try to do is organize it. Because one of the biggest mistakes we make in moments like this is confusing volume with importance, and mistaking what feels scariest for what's actually doing the most damage, right? It goes to the original trope with Trump, right? Which is, do you take him literally or seriously or both, right? And in this case, what I would say is, should you worry about what he's saying, or should you worry about what he's doing? Now, of course, I would argue the answer is yes to everything. And that's what we're going to get to. So let's start with the story that everyone understands immediately. Donald Trump goes on a podcast, muses again about federalizing elections, which of course, reminds people of him musing about I wish I could cancel the midterms, and almost simultaneously, right, when you play that, you have your file footage, right? So if you see this on video, you could just show the weird Tulsi Gabbard thing and the striking images out of Georgia of federal agents executing a raid connected to election materials from 2020. We're at nearly 6 years later. We've had multiple elections in Fulton County ever since. I mean, I sort of look at what he's doing as laughable. I think it's silly, but it is also very serious, right? We know he's desperate to continue to sell this lie that he somehow was illegitimately thrown out of office in 2020. So Trump talks about overriding elections, and then all of a sudden you see federal agents seizing ballots, right? The great fear that so many people have. So you don't need a constitutional law degree to feel your stomach drop. That is scary. Rhetoric plus visuals, threat plus spectacle. It's an easy story to tell. It fits in a tweet. It fits in a chyron. And it fits in your nervous system. And it rides the algorithm. Now, let me be very clear. The rhetoric is not harmless. This isn't normal, and it shouldn't be normalized. Election interference talk is as damaging as election interference itself. And using federal power to intimidate state workers matters a great deal. So I'm not trying to minimize what he has said or what he has done. But here's what I want you to understand, and I want to make this clear because it's essential. What feels existential is not always what's most consequential. So these two events, the rhetoric and the raid, landed together. They functioned together. They were consumed as one narrative event. It almost doesn't matter which technically came first, right? The raid itself or his rhetoric to Bongino. The meaning formed through proximity and imaging, right? That's how political narratives work now. Thanks to these algorithms, thanks to these big tech companies that control the flow of information that you and I get to see. It isn't done through chronology or nuance, but through what shows up next on your screen. And that's why this story dominates. It feels like democracy itself is on the line, and it animates a lot of people. But feeling existential isn't the same thing as actually being the thing that does the most lasting damage. Now, let me talk about the Kennedy Center here. First glance, Trump's move to effectively just shut down the Kennedy Center unilaterally under the guise of renovations. I see why some see it as cultural authoritarianism, and symbolically, sure, it's pretty ugly. And it fits a broader pattern of treating institutions as enemies and loyalty tests. But then the context of all this matters, right? And I think it tells us something pretty important about how Trump actually operates. So why did he shut this down? This wasn't a first strike. This was a reaction. He was being humiliated, right? Artists were pulling out. Performers were canceling. Events were unraveling quietly but visibly. The reputational damage was happening big time for Trump, right? The minute Trump touched the Kennedy Center, got involved, everybody wanted out. The opera wanted out. People, every classical, anybody with any level of integrity wanted, in the art community, wanted out. And it was humiliating the Kennedy Center. It was humiliating Trump, right? So Trump wasn't dominating the story. He was losing control of it. So what does he do? This is a classic Trump. He flips the script. Instead of having to deal with they're rejecting me, which is what they are doing, it becomes I shut it down. And instead of absorbing 1,000 small acts of dissent, he creates one big spectacle. Instead of reputational damage accumulating quietly, he centralizes the conflict and reframes it as Trump versus the culture, right? It's just simple spin, right? And notice what happens when he does that, right? The story becomes about Trump's power, Trump's move, Trump's dominance. Can he do it? Is it legal? The stories of the cancellations fade, the accountability dissipates, and the noise replaces the consequence. This matters because it's the same dynamic we're seeing everywhere else, which brings me back to Monday, right? While George and the Kennedy Center sucked all the oxygen out of the room early part of this week, the story I walked through earlier in the week is already fading, and that should worry us more because that story, the fact that Donald Trump has turned America into a kleptocracy for his personal enrichment, that's the story that ought to be alarming everybody because he's already doing it. and he's already done it. He has taken these payments. He has enriched himself. This isn't, he's thinking about, he's doing. This is stuff he's done. Okay? Foreign sovereign wealth flowing into Trump-linked enterprises. Policy decisions, especially around AI chips and crypto, suddenly aligning with the private financial upside. Pardons, permissions, and access all moving in parallel. And as I said, the journal never says it was a quid pro quo, but all you have to do is look, right? The modern corruption doesn't look like a brown paper bag anymore. It looks like timing, proximity, and mutual benefit. Each step defensible on its own and technically legal in some sort of Byzantine way of looking at it, but it is damning when taken together, and it is illegal when you realize it's being done by the president of the United States in violation of the Constitution. Do you hate hangovers? Well, say goodbye to hangovers. Out of Office gives you the social buzz without the next day regret. Their best-selling out-of-office gummies were designed to provide a mild, relaxing buzz, boost your mood, and enhance creativity and relaxation. With 5 different strengths, you can tailor the dose to fit your vibe, from a gentle 1.5 milligram micro dose to their newest 15 milligram gummy for a more elevated experience. Their THC beverages and gummies are a modern, mindful alternative to a glass of wine or a cocktail. And I'll tell you this, I've given up booze. I don't like the hangovers. I prefer the gummy experience. Soul is a wellness brand that believes feeling good should be fun and easy. Soul specializes in delicious hemp-derived THC and CBD products, all designed to boost your mood and simply help you unwind. And if you struggle to switch off at night, Soul has a variety of products specifically designed to help you get a better night's rest, including their top-selling Sleepy Gummies. It's a fan favorite for deep, restorative sleep. So bring on the good vibes and treat yourself to Soul today. Right now, Soul is offering my audience 30% off your entire order. So go to getsoul.com, use the promo code ToddCast. Don't forget that code. That's getsoul.com, promo code ToddCast for 30% off. And here's the moment that really sort of crystallized all this for me. So on Tuesday morning, I was scanning my usual mountain of newsletters, right? By us, lots of good ones out there, lots of mediocre ones, but I read a lot of them. Good faith actors, smart people, outlets that are deeply focused on democratic norms. And the foreign policy story was gone from a couple of them that I was shocked to see it gone from. But the election rhetoric, that was everywhere. The midterm anxiety, that was dominant. I mean, my friend Bill Kristol, who does the Morning Shots newsletter for the Bulwark on Tuesday, not a single mention of this Wall Street Journal story anymore. Look, they did a lot on Monday, but they were obsessed with the midterm issue. Ditto with Playbook, had nothing on that, had a slew on the midterm issue. We all know how this stuff, right? So some stuff travels more, some stuff rides the algorithm, right? And the way the independent media landscape works, a lot of editorial folks examine what's getting attention, what isn't, and they may lean more heavily on the stories that are getting more traction, even if there are other stories that are arguably more important. And I don't think that's bad faith. I don't think it's corruption, but it is sort of how our information ecosystem is kind of doing exactly what it's designed to do. It rewards stories that are visually immediate and emotionally legible, and quietly pushes aside stories that are technical, slow, and complicated, and might not be as gripping to as large enough of an audience. And that's exactly why the story of the creation of the American kleptocracy is much more dangerous. So it brings me back to the anxiety question, and something I want to be very clear about. As alarmed as we all are by some of Trump's rhetoric and by the sense that there are no guardrails left, the truth is a bit more complicated. Because what's interesting is every time we lament this idea that there are no guardrails, you start to see that some of them do work. Not all of them, not consistently, but some of them, some of the time. And it's interesting for us to realize when they do work and when they don't work. And understanding which ones work and why is the difference, I think, between whether you should panic and whether you should view it as some sort of strategery. So let me give you 2 examples. First, there's Minneapolis. After the killing of 2 Americans, And let's just say it took 2 American deaths for Trump to do this. Trump did something he almost never does rhetorically. He backed down. He sat down with Senate Democrats. He negotiated. He accepted the premise that they were going to shut down the government if he didn't negotiate constraints on ICE. And he said, okay. Right? Here's a guy that his critics consistently say, doesn't listen to anything. And he did on this one. So why? Was it because of norms? No, we know he doesn't care about norms. Was it because someone made a better constitutional argument to him? Sorry. Or was it because the political cost suddenly became undeniable, even for Trump? Right? Public opinion has shifted dramatically on this issue. Republicans got nervous. The backlash wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't just coming from Democrats that owned the libs. It was measurable. And Trump does respond to measurable pain, at least political pain in polling. Look at the Fed. We heard all the noise, the threats, the posturing. And then the choice came down to it. He picked Kevin Warsh, a conventional, even market reassuring pick. He didn't pick a sycophant, a guy like Kevin Hassett, who might have been somebody who would have just, been a yes man for whatever Trump wanted on interest rates. So why did he do that? Well, one guardrail, he does seem to care about our markets, right? And he cares about what some donors think, his donors, and he certainly cares about what the elites that he interacts with think. So the guardrail wasn't the idea of Fed independence. It was the risk of immediate, tangible financial consequences for him and his friends. So it's an interesting pattern that you've watched over. It's like every once in a while he responds to a guardrail, but it's never for the reason you want him to respond to a guardrail. It's for usually some sort of personal cost and personal nervousness. So it does seem as if Trump accepts pushback when 3 conditions are met. First, the cost is immediate. It's not theoretical. It's not long-term. It's immediate. Second, the backlash is something he sees. It's poll numbers, market drops, donor anger, maybe even a ratings issue, right? It's not an editorial. It's not a whole bunch of statements, right? And if the pressure is across the board, right? Lots of people in lots of different parts of his life going, hey, are you sure about this? Are you sure about this? Are you sure about this? Right? It's why he seemed to back down a bit on Minneapolis. And I know some of you are going to say he hasn't backed down that much, but for Trump, he's backed down, right? What happened? You had Republicans saying, whoa, this went too far. Same with the Fed. But all those reasons are also explain why it's so hard for the foreign policy monetization story to get legs, because it fails those 3 tests. The costs are delayed. We won't see the impact of selling out American foreign policy, creating loopholes for China to catch up. We won't know this until after it's too late. The consequences are on a spreadsheet, and none of us like to read spreadsheets. And of course, the backlash is a bit fragmented. There's no market crash. There's no single dramatic moment. There's no image on cable news, just a slow monetization of power. And we see it. We see it almost every week when he releases the list of people he's pardoned, and you start to go through it and you realize most of them were represented by friends of Trump, and he just was monetizing, helping them win fees from these rich crooks. It also explains why I'm less worried about Trump's election rhetoric than I am about what he's doing with foreign policy. Elections in the United States are decentralized by design. States run them, counties administer them. The diffusion isn't a weakness, it's actually a firewall, right? Trump doesn't control it. Republicans quietly know he can't override it without detonating their own power. They can't do it. They'd have to pass acts of Congress. There's so many different ways in order to make this happen. For it to happen, the Republic would essentially have to collapse. We'd have to suspend the Constitution. And we're not, and he doesn't have that kind of power. And now, ironically, I think politically, every time Trump muses about interfering with elections, he doesn't suppress turnout, which I know is a fear some people have. He fuels it. He energizes opposition voters. He repels swing voters who just want to get rid of the chaos. And he deepens cynicism among his own base. So if you were trying to design the dumbest possible strategy heading into the midterm election, you'd be hard-pressed to beat the one Trump is doing right now. Talk about, if you're on the Democratic side of the aisle, you should want him talking about this. All it does is it saves you money on get out the vote. Donald Trump is going to get your base out to vote. And then he's sending a message that he thinks the whole thing is rigged anyway. And he's sending a message to his own base that, he's sort of winking and nodding. Don't worry, I'll rig it, so it doesn't matter. They're not going to show up. So yes, the rhetoric's extraordinarily dangerous, and I don't want to dismiss it. But it is institutionally constrained and politically incredibly self-defeating. That's not the case with this foreign policy story. Congress is supposed to be the check here. The voters are never going to be the check on this story. It's going to take them a while to get it. This Congress has shown no interest in investigating the leader of their own party. So that story is just going to keep going. He's going to keep selling foreign policy decisions to the highest bidder. Sometimes he'll do it right out in the open. Sometimes he'll do it quietly. I mean, at times it feels like Venezuela and the oil he's just doing it right out in the open. But most of this he'll do out of view. So the point is this: no, I don't think the country's collapsing tomorrow. And no, I don't think elections are going to get canceled 2026. But I do think we're watching something more subtle and more corrosive. Democracies don't usually fall from coups. They actually erode. They look more like what's happening in Turkey, what's happening in Hungary. They erode when corruption becomes complicated, normalized, and easier to ignore than the latest outrage, cultural outrage. Bad Bunny, pay attention to Bad Bunny, but don't pay attention to the selling out of American foreign policy. So what Trump does say threatens democracy symbolically, but what Trump does corrodes it materially. And our information ecosystem, whether it intends to or not, keeps steering us towards the loudest, scariest stories, while the most consequential ones fade in the background. That's the real danger. It's not the panic. It's not the calm. It's misplaced attention and misplaced concern. There used to be a publication out there that once reminded us, democracy dies in darkness. But sometimes that darkness is also noisy, and the democracy can die in a lot of distraction and noise. Having good life insurance is incredibly important. I know from personal experience. I was 16 when my father passed away. We didn't have any money. He didn't leave us in the best shape. My mother, single mother now, widow, myself, 16, trying to figure out how am I going to pay for college. And lo and behold, my dad had one life insurance policy that we found. It wasn't a lot, but it was important at the time. And it's why I was able to go to college. Little did he know how important that would be in that moment. Well, guess what? That's why I am here to tell you about Ethos Life. They can provide you with peace of mind knowing your family is protected, even if the worst comes to pass. Ethos is an online platform that makes getting life insurance fast and easy, all designed to protect your family's future in minutes, not months. There's no complicated process, and it's 100% online. There's no medical exam required. You just answer a few health questions online. You can get a quote in as little as 10 minutes, and you can get same-day coverage without ever leaving your home. You can get up to $3 million in coverage, and some policies start as low as $2 a day. That would be billed monthly. As of March 2025, Business Insider named Ethos the #1 no medical exam instant life insurance provider. So protect your family with life insurance from Ethos. Get your free quote at ethos.com/Chuck. So again, that's ethos.com/Chuck. Application times may vary, and the rates themselves may vary as well. But trust me, life insurance is something you should really think about, especially if you've got a growing family.